Hey everybody, this video is going to take a step-by-step look at how we can import a CSV file into Unreal Engine and then use the resulting data table to update the text in our motion design graphics in Unreal Engine. Now, I'm going to do this step-by-step for folks that are maybe new to Blueprint and using data tables in Unreal Engine. If you're familiar with those things, you may want to take a look at an earlier version of this where I just kind of went through a pre-built setup. And if you're already familiar with blueprints and such, that'll be easy to follow and it'll be a little bit quicker for you. So take a look in the description for that if you want to find that. Now, that said, going through this step by step, I am going to use the end of a previous tutorial as my starting point. So that tutorial went over how to create a lower thirds graphic and how to put a playlist together with that. And that is also linked in the description so you can get to the point where you have this lower third graphic. We've already got a sequence set up in the level, right? So there's an in sequence that brings the graphic in. If it's played backwards, it takes the graphic out. And there's also a change sequence that fades it in, fades it out, etc. And that tutorial also created a playlist, but we're going to do that from scratch this time around. But you do want to have this lower thirds level. The transition logic needs to be set up, etc. So go to the description to get that link if you need to get to this point. With that said, now we're ready to go ahead and start putting together our data table, bring it into Unreal, and then apply it to our text. So the first thing I want to do is actually create the data table itself. I'm going to launch Notepad for that because that's just a simple text editor in Windows, and CSV files are just text files. Now, a CSV file is a data table, so there are rows and there's columns. Every row is a line in our text file. Every column is separated by a comma, hence the comma separated values of a CSV file. Now, in Unreal Engine, all of our data imports are going to expect the very first column to contain row IDs, names for each individual row. So we really don't need a column name for the very first column. I'm going to put in 3 dashes. And then I'll put in a comma to separate that from the name of the first column that actually contains data. That column is going to be called text data. All right, so there's text data. And that's all I'm going to need for this particular data table is a row ID and then a column for the actual data itself. I'll hit enter to start a new row. And I'll call the first row ID LT1 for lower third 1, comma, and then the actual value, that'll be text space 1, and then enter, and then LT2, comma, text 2, and so on. I'll just speed through this to put on a few more rows so you don't have to watch this paint dry. Okay, so there we go. I've got 5 rows of data plus a header row. The header has a name for our one data column, text data, and every single row has an ID, LT1, LT2, LT3, etc. So let me save this as a CSV file, save as. And I'm just using the saved folder for my project. So instead of the content folder, I'm just putting this into the saved folder. And I want to call this a CSV file, so I'm just going to call this list1.csv. So comma separated value, and there's the saved folder for my project save, and that saves that first file. Now I want a variant of this, so I'm going to change the word text here to title. Let me just do edit and replace, and I'll change the word text to title and find next, replace, find next, can't find it, replace that. Yeah, I can't find it again. Now let's go back to the beginning here, find next. And I'm just doing this find next, replace cycle so that I don't have to change the name of my column, right? So if I did a replace all, it would have also changed text data to title data. And we need to keep the column name the same for any variant of our data. Okay, so list1 CSV, so file save as, and we'll call this list2 CSV. All right, so we've got 2 different CSV files. They both have the same column name for the data, text data. They both have the same row IDs. The row IDs can be different from table to table, that's fine. But then they also have different text. Okay, so we'll close that. And now we want to import that. So let's create a folder to store the data. Right click, new folder, data tables. Double click to go in there. And before we import, we need to define the structure of the data table. So right click, and it's under Blueprint that we can choose structure. And I'll call this LT struct for the structure of our lower thirds data. Control S to save, double click, and by default we have a single variable in our structure, member var1. This is what we need to match with our data column. So I'm going to double click here and type in text data to match what's in our CSV files. Also, this is a Boolean variable, which can only be true and false. We actually want a string of text. So I'm going to click on here, click this drop down and choose string. Now we're ready to save this and our structure is ready to be imported. So close, right click, import into game, and we just want to find our list one and open. Now it'll ask us if we want a data table or something else. Indeed, we do want a data table, and choose what data row type. That's going to be our LT struct. So I hit the drop down here, and there's LT struct, and apply. And there's our data. I'll select that and Control S to save it. Double click to check it, and sure enough, we've got our text values. And if I wanted to try the other data table, I should be able to right click, re-import with a new file, and choose list 2. Open that, and now we've got titles instead. So that's all working. Right click, re-import with new, list 1, that goes back to text. Perfect. Save, close, and that's it for bringing the data in. Now we need to work on being able to update our motion design text based on the data that's in here. So back up to our step-by-step folder, and this time I'm going to start by making a duplicate of this level and editing that duplicate. So I'm going to select the level in our content browser, Control D to duplicate it, and then I'll call it TL for transition logic, -L3 for lower thirds, and CSV automated. And finally, that's it. Enter, and Control S to save it, and double click to open it up. Now, when we open up the level, by default, we get our remote control panel, and I do want to make an adjustment to that because this remote control panel has a exposed property for the text that's in our graphic, and we're not going to update that with the control panel or with the rundown. Instead, we're going to be updating this with a blueprint, some automation. So I can right click and delete that. And let me just check under observation. Oh yeah, sure enough, there's a controller that was created for that. So I want to get rid of that as well. So select that, right click and delete. So if for some reason, when you first open this remote control and you only get the properties, I just go back and forth between operation setup and make sure I get the controllers. So we'll leave the color controls in here, but I got rid of the text. All right, so we'll close that, go back to our content browser and save all. All right. And then we're ready to get to work, right? So we can play this just to be able to see our lower third. And now I want to create a custom actor that I can put into the level that will do the work of reading data from the table, checking that data, and then putting it into the text. So the method for that is to create something called a blueprint actor. To do that, I right click, I go to blueprint class. I'm going to create a new blueprint class, and the blueprint class that I'm going to create is actor. What this does is set up a structure that we can put into levels. So I'm just going to call this CSV auto and underscore BP. So there's my blueprint for CSV automation, Control S to save it. And then I can click and drag it into the level. It shows up with a little icon, but that icon never renders. Okay, and we do see it here in our outliner. And if I go to details, I can see details about it. So we can begin to customize this, and the first thing we want to do is really customize the execution of a routine. And so that's a blueprint graph that we're going to be creating. So I'll double click to open this up. We're not going to use this viewport version because we're not going to add any meshes to this. Instead, we're really just going to work in the event graph to create some executable code. So I don't need any of the content that's in here already. So just click and drag to select all of that and hit delete to delete it. And just as an example of how do we run code in here, how do we use Blueprint to do script, it's very easy, it's very visual, it uses nodes. So the very first node that would launch any kind of execution is a custom event. It's something that will trigger either from the editor or through collisions or from our sequencer ultimately. So I'll right click, type in custom event, or just the word custom, and I can see here in our drop-down list, add custom event. So I select that and I need to give it a name. So I'm going to call it update text and enter. And now that is the name of a new script that it can run. Now there's nothing following this execution pin, so we have nothing to execute. Just as an example test here, I'm going to pull off of this and just print a message to the screen, to the viewport, typing in the word print string. It says the string hello. And there's just a little glitch with this. And that is that, well, the camera actor label here, when we're piloting it, is going to cover the exact same spot that this text would appear in. So I'm just going to select, put my cursor here in front of the hello, hold the shift key and hit enter twice, and that'll put in a couple of lines above the text of hello, and then hello will draw underneath that. Compile. Now I also want to be able to run this event from within the editor. So I need the call in editor to be enabled. Right now it's disabled, and as a result, if I'm looking at this Blueprint Actors details, there's no button. But if I say call in editor and I compile, now we have a new button, update text. And if I click it, it should print this hello message. Ta-da, there we go. All right, so now we know we can have an event and it can run. So I'll select this and delete it. And next thing, we're going to need information to work with in order to process the information onto our text. And the information we need is, well, number one, we need the data table. Number two, we need the row ID, which row are we going to pull from. Number three, we're going to need the column name so that we know we're pulling the right data in case there's more than one column. And finally, the fourth piece of information we need is the actor here that actually contains the text that's displayed here. So those are the four pieces of information. So in our blueprint, we'll make sure we create variables to store that information. So I'm going to hit this plus button here to add a variable. And the first one will be data table. And then we'll create another one here, and that'll be row ID. So which row? And add another one for column ID. And finally, add one last one for the text actor, the actor that actually displays the text. Now, right now, by default, these variables are all Boolean types, and that's not going to do us very good because that can only hold a true or a false. So the data table needs to be a pointer to the data table or a reference to it. So I'm going to click on this Boolean and type in the word data for data table. Sure enough, there's data table, and off of that we have object reference. Perfect. And then we have row ID. Well, that, by the way, data tables, the row ID and the column ID are names, not strings. So instead of Boolean, we want to change that to name. And same thing for the column ID, name. And finally, the text actor. This actor right here, it will just use a generic actor reference. So click on Boolean, type in the word actor, and sure enough, actor, object reference. Perfect. So there's our four variables. But if I save this now, compile it, we don't have access to those variables in our details. And that's just because they're not exposed to the details panel. This little I that's closed right now is the button that basically exposes the variables to details. So if I click the one for data table and then compile, now the data table is exposed in details. So I can go into my data tables folder, click and drag our list one right into that. And now we have populated this variable with our data for this actor that's in our level. Okay, so now we need our row ID, column ID, and text actor to be exposed. So let's go ahead and open these eyes, compile again. And now we have all of those here in our details. So I'm going to double click on row ID and make that LT1. Column ID, well, that's going to be that text data. And finally, the text actor, I can click this drop down and choose the Ava text actor. And so that populates all of our variables, and we're ready to move on. Let's do a save all while we're at it. And finally, now we can get to work and actually create our automation. So the first thing we want to check is this text actor actually a valid text actor to work with? So I'm going to go ahead and drag the text actor variable into our workflow. I'll click get text actor. This gets the value that's in there. And then I want to cast this to a Ava text actor so that I can see the values that are inside it for updating the text. So I pull from here, type in cast to Ava text, and there it is, cast to Ava text actor. And it is possible that maybe the user forgot to populate the variable, or maybe they accidentally put a non-text actor into that variable. So there is an execution pin off of this saying cast failed. So this failed to convert the actor in this variable, whether it was blank or something else, into an AVA text actor. So with that cast failed, we can do a print command to put a little error up on our viewport. So cast failed, I'm going to do print string, and we're going to call this bad text actor. And just to indicate that this is an error, I'm going to expand this, change the color to red. Okay, compile, and I can test this out just by putting a non-text actor into here. So I can click here and choose the rectangle, right? And so this is not a text actor. So if I run this now, I should see a little error appear here. Oh, I won't, because I forgot to add those two little lines, because our little text message is going to appear behind this camera designator. So shift enter enter in front of the word bad, and now compile. Now we should be good. If I hit update text, sure enough, bad text actor. Let's select a good text actor, AVA text actor, run that again, and we're good. We didn't go into our error, but we didn't have anything else to execute, so that's all that happened. Great. So far, so good. Now, let's get our data table and make sure that's valid. So our next thing to do will be to pull out our data table. Let's get that, and let's see if it's valid. So I'm going to pull from here and type in is valid. Sure enough, there's a function for is valid. Very good. And that is valid results in a true-false boolean. So it's true if it's actually valid, and it's false if it's not valid. So now I want to branch. So I'm just going to pull from my execution pin, release, and type in branch. And this branch will be based on a condition, and here is our boolean value. We'll put that in as our condition. If it's false, it wasn't valid. So I'm just going to copy this print string, Control-C, Control-V, false, print that string, and instead of bad text actor, we're going to call this bad data table, and so on. I'm not going to bother with testing this. That should work fine. We'll test once we get everything put together. If it's true, we have a valid table. So now we want to check for our row ID. So from this data table, I want to get rows, find rows. Let's see if we can do find rows. Let's say get row names. There we go. So for our data table, we will get the row names. That is an array of all the different row names. So that'll be the LT1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're coming off of this branch of true, and we are getting our list of row names. Double click here to put in a little dot node so we can clean this up a bit. And then we want to find this row ID in our array that comes from this. So I'm going to go here, drag my row ID variable out, get the row ID, pull from this array list and say that I want to find an item in that list. And this is the item I want to find. And if I hover over this, you will see that we get an output on this pin. It's an integer, so it's a whole number value. And if we did not find the row ID, we get a -1. So we can assume that if we did get the row ID, it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So we want to check to see if this is less than 0, or it's valid if it's greater than or equal to 0. It's not valid if it's not greater than or equal to 0. So pulling off of this integer, I'm going to say greater than equal to, greater equal. 0 is our default. We get a boolean. So now we can do a branch based on this. So we'll pull on our execution pin, type in branch, and the condition for our branch is whether or not this is indeed greater than or equal to 0. Okay, if it's false, well, I think we still have our print in our clipboard, so Control-V, there is a print, very good. False, we're going to print an error saying that this is a bad row ID. Excellent. Okay. So now we know we have a good row ID. We know we have a good table. We just want to find our text value in this particular column. So from our data table here, we want to get a column as a string. So get column, here it is, get data table column as a string. There we go. What column do we want? Well, we want the column that is matching this column ID. Let's bring this out here, get that column ID, connect it into here, execution off of the branch for true. We'll go ahead and double click to get our little dot node, tidy things up. And so this should give us a list of values from inside this column ID. Over here we got our list of values from the row, and we found our row ID. So now this row ID is going to be used as the index for this. But before we go and find the value we want to make sure that we got anything at all in this list. So if the length of this is 0, we need to branch out. If the length is greater than 0, we're going to keep it. So let's get our list and type in length. And we'll pull off of our integer and say greater than. And if it's greater than 0, then that's true. So let's pull from our execution pin and say branch. Right there, branch. And finally, give our Boolean results right there. Okay. Again, false. Control V, paste our print string right there. And instead of text actor, this is a bad column ID. Right, because the length here, this is false if it is 0 or lower. And so we didn't really find anything that matched that column ID. Okay, so that's all the strings are right here. They're in a list, and this list is going to match the list of row IDs. So whatever index we found for this row ID right here, there's our index, is going to contain the string that we want. So let's go ahead and get our string value out of here. Let me just move this out of the way, pull here, and I'm just going to get a reference to our string. And we will get the integer of that from the row ID that we found. So let's just pull this over here and double click for a dot. Move that. Good enough. Okay. So this now will have the string that we want to put into our text. So we should be good. We found our column ID. We found our row ID. We know everything's good. We should now have a string ready to go. And we also know that our text actor is indeed a text actor. So at this point, pulling from true, we want to put this string onto this text. So first of all, let's go ahead and get our text actor again. Get that. And we'll go ahead and cast that to an Ava text actor. Wonderful. We're expecting that to be successful at this point because we tested it earlier. Now, what we're getting here is the motion design text, this actor right here. However, if I select that, what we can see is inside that we have a text 3D component. And even though text is exposed here for the actor, that text 3D component inside the actor is what actually holds the text. So we need to get that text 3D component. So I'm going to pull off of our Ava motion design text and say get text 3D component, and that will contain our text, and we're going to want to update that. So from this we will pull off a pin and say set text, and we need to scroll down. There it is, set text. We're going to execute that, and the text itself is going to come from this value that we got from the column. And that really should be it. Let's compile it and save it. And let's test it out. So I'll move our blueprint out of the way. I'll select my blueprint actor. And hopefully all of this works. And I click update text and this changes to text 1. Wow, it's working. And let's go ahead and re-import with a new file. And if I run this again, we should now see title 1. Wonderful. If I change this from LT1 to LT3, this should be title 3. It's working perfectly. All right, let's do a save all, and we're in good shape there. So with this in place, we're ready to be able to add a trigger to our sequences so that the routine that's in here, this blueprint that we created, this is going to get run from the sequence. So we have update text is the name of the event in this actor, and we want the sequencer to fire this and update the text before the text is visible. So let me just close my blueprint editor. We'll go into sequencer, and here's our in sequence, right? So if I go to the beginning of that and play, it brings our data in. And so, anywhere here, I can add a trigger for my update text event so the text gets updated before it's visible. So let's have our actor selected. That's our automation actor. I'm going to add that to sequencer, actor to track. Here's our auto BP. And then I'm going to add a track to this that is an event track. I'm going to trigger an event. And so now we have that track. I'm on frame 2, so I'm going to add a trigger. Then right-click on that trigger, go to Properties, and I need to set an endpoint. Right now it's not bound to anything, so the trigger happens, but it doesn't do anything. So instead, I want to bind that to the update text event in this actor. So click on this, quick bind, and it's going to be inside the actor. It's going to be inside the actor class. It's going up inside the actor, inside the class, inside the BP, and there is my update text event. And there we go. So what's happened here is we've just opened up the blueprint that is called the director blueprint. It's built into the sequence. So the sequence fires an event, and that event calls the event from our actor. So we're good to go with that. I'll close that. And we'll just want to make sure we run that when we change our text as well. So if I go to my change sequence, now I don't want to run the event at the beginning of the sequence because the text is still visible. I want to make sure it happens while the text is not visible and that it's being re-shown. So I'm going to go a frame after the marker A, because when we play this in, this change over, it's going to kind of start from the A to play the in, transition in. So one frame after that marker, I'm going to go ahead and add my blueprint actor. We'll add our event track. We'll add our trigger key. And finally, right-click, Properties, Quick Bind, Blueprint Actor, Class, BP, and there is our update text. And then there is our director blueprint for the sequence. The sequence has a trigger, and that fires our update text event. All right, save, close, Control-Shift-S to save all. We should be all saved. And this should work now. And just as a test, for example, I can go back to my play in. It's currently title 3. Go to the beginning. We should be able to fade A up. There we go. Everything's out. I'll select my blueprint actor and I will change this to LT1. And so now, oh, really important. This isn't going to work. I forgot something. If I hit play right now from the beginning, it's still going to say that title 3 instead of title 1. And the reason is I forgot to set the properties of this trigger such that they run in editor. So right click on that trigger, properties, call in editor. Just like for the blueprint to put that button in, I want to call in editor here. Let's do that for our change script as well. Right click, properties, call in editor. And now we can test this out again. Let's start here and hit play, and it should come through title 1. There we go. Go to change. We're starting at the beginning. Again, I'll just change this to LT2 just as a test. Enter and play. Should fade out. Title 2. Perfect. Let's go ahead and save all. So we do have one last thing, and really to make this useful, we want to make sure that the rundown playlist can choose which row ID we want to pull for any given playlist page. So to do that, we're going to want to add this row ID to our remote control for this level. So we'll expose the remote control window. We don't have a property exposed yet, but now row ID has the option for that. So row ID, expose that, and it's LT2. Let's just make the default LT1. Enter. And now as we enter into that, it gets updated here. And let's make sure we add a controller so that we can see that in the playlist. So I'm just going to drag this right to here. Row ID, LT1, wonderful. So let's go ahead and save all. Now we should be ready to put this together in a playlist and make sure it works. So we'll close this step by step. I'm going to right click, create a new playlist. So that is motion design rundown. We'll call this CSV demo playlist. Enter, Control S to save, double click. Okay, we'll put in our CSV automated level as our template, drag in a page here, drag in a second page, select our first page. We'll use LT2, let's do LT4 for that. And our second page will be LT5. We only went to 5 on our little titles. Let me make sure, I didn't hit enter. LT5, enter. This one, LT4. Okay, great. So right now, this should be ready to go. If I preview in, we should get title 4. And if I preview next, I should fade out and get title 5. Boom, everything's working. Preview out, we're good to go. So that is everything step by step for using a CSV data file and updating our motion graphics with that data. I hope this helps. I've got some more videos on this coming. There was a request about doing automated data table updating, and also have some plans for being able to update lists of information from a single data table. So those tutorials are coming soon. But until next time, I hope this helps. Have fun.